There we go. You can see the count popping up. Thanks everybody for joining. We're gonna get started in about 3 or 4 minutes.
Sounds good.
Chebu is gonna play a little music for us as we wait. Perfect. All right. Can you see these slides, Chebu?
Yep, perfectly.
All right. Welcome everybody to Bonfire number 11. We are getting down to the end of these bonfires. There are only 2 more after this Monday's lesson. We are still in the systems thinking unit. I am excited to be welcoming back Chebu. Welcome.
Super happy to be here tonight. Really in love with this topic, so we have some cool stuff to talk about tonight.
Yeah, really excited to share tonight's lesson with you. We have a lot in store, so I'll let Chebu tell us about our agenda for tonight. Oh, actually, I'm going to do the agenda. So on our agenda, we are going to talk about what an iceberg is. We're going to dive deep into this concept of the iceberg and how it can help us understand complex issues. Second, we're going to talk about how we spot trends and patterns within a system. Third, we're going to talk about how we use these tools to help us better and understand any important event that we see. And then we are going to have Q&A as usual. Number 5, breakout hangout. Unfortunately, I caught the Slack chat just before and I saw that Dariel has canceled breakout hangout. So if you have a gripe about that, please hit up the Banana Man Dariel.
All right, awesome. So I'm going to get us started on our first Slack question of the evening. So what's an example of an event or issue that seemed straightforward at first, but became way more complex as time went on? So this could be about anything from home to school, the country. A good example that's on the slide would be IKEA furniture. Always looks really simple, usually turns out to be something else. And you guys can go ahead and start sending your messages into the Slack. We'll be reading them out.
Transitioning school online. Thanks for solving the breakout hangout stuff. The question, just to reiterate, is what's an example of an event or issue that at first seemed straightforward but became way more complex? So there's a lot of good ones here. School in general, economics and government aid programs.
Playing an instrument always seems very cool, and then getting into it's a task, but it's an amazing skill still.
Ooh, being a good friend, right? That's a good one, Gary. Over time, that's definitely going to become more complex. Distance learning.
Oh, I like Freya's example. Corruption, resolving that, dealing with that in government, always seems kind of straightforward, but it is obviously pretty nuanced. Self-care, that's a great example, Victoria.
Yeah, a lot of people are putting some specific subjects like their English essay or algebra or a math course, logarithms, yeah.
Me and Jacob are in the same boat, getting enough sleep. I thought being done with classes would mean I'd be getting a great amount of sleep. That is very far from the truth. Meditation.
Oh. Yeah, meditation. I really resonate with that one. At first I was, yeah, just sit with your thoughts for a little while with no distractions. See how that goes. It can get way more complicated. Running an organization or leading a campaign, yes, Dariel. Although I wouldn't say that those seem straightforward at first. I think running an organization is pretty complicated and tough. Make a routine.
Special shout out to Natalia for making a routine. It's the hardest thing to establish, for sure.
These are all really good responses. Thank you everybody for for these responses. And so tonight we're gonna talk about this. A lot of examples of events or issues that at first seem straightforward, but become way more complex as time goes on. Ooh, the past. Oh, we just saw that one. So has anyone here ever heard of the Titanic or seen the movie? I'm sure some of you have, although I think that came out in the 90s, so maybe some people haven't seen it. I never actually saw it, and it was a big deal. It was one of those movies that when you don't see it, people react like, how did you not see this movie? Like, we got to watch this movie now. How have you not seen it? Have you seen it, Chabu, actually?
Yeah, because I'm a normal
Because people
person.
say that to you? Yeah.
No, it's a really good movie though. I would recommend it.
Yeah, well, I never saw it, but I know a little bit about the history of the ship, and it's okay if none of you have seen it either. Really don't know that much about it. What's important, the important fact for us, is what most people know, is the fact that it sunk. It was a ship that was supposed to be unsinkable, but it sunk because it hit an iceberg. So, why did the captain of the Titanic think he could sail through an iceberg? One reason, just hubris, right? Thinking that the ship was indestructible and could take on anything. But the bigger reason is that he could only see the tip of the iceberg. He could only see the top of the iceberg. That's all he thought there was, just on the surface. He just thought there was a layer of ice and that his ship would be able to crush right through that ice. He had no idea that underneath the surface was a massive block of ice that no ship could cut through, no matter how big or how titanic. And so the same is true of the examples you gave at the beginning of tonight's bonfire, and many of the biggest issues that are facing our country. The events that we see on the surface level events, are usually just symptoms of something bigger happening underneath. And you could argue that we are only seeing the tip of the iceberg of many of the world's biggest problems, whether that's climate change, whether that's the pandemic, whether that's our healthcare system, justice system, education system, whatever it may be. We're only seeing the tip of the iceberg because we're not looking deep enough to see what's really going on.
So how can we get a clearer picture of what's going on? So using this metaphor, kind of continuing on with that, we need to examine what's going on beneath the surface. We can hopefully find some leverage points to improve what's going on above the surface by having a more comprehensive full assessment and kind of looking at what's underneath as well. Going below the surface can help us better understand any complex system, such as our healthcare system, the education system, or our democracy.
Okay, so here's what the iceberg looks like. It's a diagram that systems thinkers use to better understand a system. Tonight, we are talking about the top two, the events, which are above the surface. That's the tip of the iceberg. That's what we see on the news. That's what we hear about in conversations with our peers and teachers. Those are the things that we see every day. We see those events happening. They're the headlines. They're what's on social media. Below that, though, there are lots of things going on that are unseen. And so we're going to talk tonight also about the next level below, which is patterns of behavior. There we ask questions like, what are the patterns? What changes have occurred over time? And we focus on how events are related and begin to explore the causes of those events. Then below that, there's another layer, which is the structure of the system. Here we ask, what has influenced the patterns? What are the relationships among the parts of the system? That's actually going to be next lesson. We're going to talk about the structure of the system. Really important to start diagramming that to see what it looks like. And then finally, the last layer, the deepest layer of the iceberg, are mental models. These are unseen and deeply hidden. We've introduced the concept of mental models before because it's super important, and we're going to actually end the fellowship talking about mental models, because if we are to change anything, if we are to make any progress in these systems, then mental models do need to be risen to the surface and need to be changed. And so that is the iceberg. We're gonna be looking at it over the next few lessons. So don't feel like you need to memorize this, but it's a really cool tool for analyzing a system.
All right, so we're going to start from the top of the iceberg and dive into events. So take a minute and think about a critical event or issue that you have had trouble understanding why it happened. So, not something trivial like what you ate for lunch, like think about a serious issue that kind of impacts our democracies or your local democracy or community. This event or issue can be something that emerged in class, in the class you're taking this year, in school as a whole, in the community you live in, or in the country as well. And once you have your issue or event, please post it in the Slack.
Well, I see some good ones already. Yeah, the Israel-Palestine conflict, great one to explore more. Flint, Michigan water crisis, Kashmir, Yemen civil war. These are all great events or issues that we are having trouble understanding. Watergate.
Watergate, that's a really great one.
Oh, the fight over Cheney's seat in the House. Yep, and the leadership position. Gun violence. Yeah, I mean, gun violence is a one that we see every single day. There was just another mass shooting in Colorado, I believe, yesterday. It feels like those are things that are totally on the surface, those events, and we have no idea what's going on below that's causing all of this.
Vaccine patent sharing. Yeah, that's a event that's like really of topic right now. It's really interesting to dive into kind of the history of owning those ideas. Middle Eastern conflicts. That is definitely one that the further you go down the iceberg, there's a lot of information that gets revealed that I personally wasn't aware of. That was super useful.
Yeah, that's a good one where you really need to understand the patterns and trends and look at the history of the Middle East to start really understanding those conflicts. Vietnam, yeah, you could study that your whole life. These are all fantastic responses. If you haven't explored these already, I'm going to suggest that you focus on these for the rest of the fellowship as we go through some examples. You can start applying them to these topics. All right. So I wanted to give you one example that's not a national event. Most of you gave like really big events, like world events or national events that are totally worthy of this kind of introspection and exploration. But I wanted to give you a smaller example to show you that you could examine something that is just happening at your school or in your town or even within your peer group or your family, and applying systems thinking tools to those smaller scale events. So here's an event that happened at my old school that I used to teach at in Boston. And this happened after I left, and I'm not using names or anything like that, so we don't have to worry about that stuff. But what happened was in 2018, the school's enrollment, particularly the freshman enrollment, dropped to its lowest ever level from about 100 students the previous year to just 70 students in 2018. It had been declining a little bit in the previous year, but no one was prepared for this big of a drop off. You might be thinking, what's the big deal? 30 kid difference? Not a big deal. But at a school like mine that only had about 350 kids, that makes a big difference. And it's because school funding is tied to how many students were enrolled. Some of you might know this already, but most schools have a per pupil allowance of how much they're able to spend each year. Our co-founder Josh likes to criticize that because he knows that not all of that money goes directly to a student. So if a school says, we spend 20K per student, that doesn't mean that, that $20,000 gets spent directly on a student. And he's right. A lot of that money gets spent in very different ways. But if the enrollment at a school goes down by 30%, then sometimes the amount that's allowed to be spent goes down 30% as well. So if you're getting $20,000, that's going to go down to like $14,000, $13,000 per student, which is big for a school. And so people panicked at my school when the enrollment dropped like this. Different factions blamed each other for this. The parents blamed the principal, demanding that he enroll more students. The principal blamed the parents, saying that they weren't showing enough support for the school, and that's why enrollment was declining. The school board even fired teachers because there were not enough students to teach anymore. And so the enrolled students were the ones who really had to deal with this. They were sitting left wondering whether the school would even still be around for them to graduate in 4 years. So big deal that only 70 kids enrolled that year instead of the usual 100. Now, when something like this happens and people are faced with a difficult situation, the best thing to do is usually to do something, right? Everybody wants to, do something to try to rectify this. And people tend to respond to events by reacting like this with something, anything that makes them feel better, like they're addressing the issue. And this is understandable, but it's sometimes not effective. And so I want to ask you that, what if instead of rushing to react to an event like this, we saw the event as just the tip of the iceberg, just the top? And what if hidden underneath this event is actually the key to understanding and potentially solving the problem? So the key is to go beyond that top level, that event, and go down into the patterns of behavior, which is what we're going to talk about right now. In order to see what those patterns look like, we need to use a graph. We call this a behavior over time graph. It's really simple. All it does is show us how a system is behaving over a certain period of time. And so I'll show you what one looks like. Here is the freshman enrollment over time at my old school. You can see this goes back to 2007 and goes to 2018. And if you look at the patterns of behavior, you can see that 70 students was not actually that huge of a drop off. If you look back at some of the years past, there were around 75 students in 2007, again in 2013, 2014. It wasn't that actually huge of a drop off in 2018. And sometimes there were events that were happening that caused either enrollment to go up or go down. For example, the Great Recession, actually, we saw enrollment go up. When a nearby public school opened, we saw enrollment go down. When a new principal was hired, we saw enrollment first go down, and then we saw it go up when the school was named a top charter school in the area. And then finally, we saw it decline in 2018. And so before we fired any teachers, before we started blaming each other, the first thing we needed to do was actually go back and look at this over time. And that didn't happen, right? And so this is a lesson that a lot of adults aren't willing to hear, right? They want to take action at first. And so what we're going to do with you tonight is try to practice this with a different data set and with an issue that we think applies more directly to you.
So we're going to test this out looking at this behavioral over time graph, and it focuses on teen employment over time. And so you can see all the way from the 1950s to around 2020. Obviously, there's been a serious decline over the last 20 years, especially you see the dip that happened right before, right around the time of the pandemic, where very little students were actually working. And so this was made by the U.S. Recession. This was resourced from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. So to give some context, it's from the U.S. And moving on to the next slide. So take a minute, and what questions do you have about this particular set of data? Feel free to respond in the Slack. We'd love to hear some of your questions.
Yeah, and I'll keep this up while people are responding to this. This is similar to what we did last week when we'd use the notice and wonder protocol. So right now, we're not making any judgments yet about the data. We'll get to that where we get to posit what might be going on here. But right now, just questions. Yeah, why aren't as many teens working anymore? Great question. Why did employment spike in the late 70s? That's a fascinating question. Where are these teens getting employed?
There's a question of, should teenagers need employment?
Yeah, that's another good one.
Allison's looking for other examples of data. So how does this align with economic recessions?
Yeah, that one, the recessions are shaded. If you see these like shaded columns, that's where the recessions happened.
Were there any changes in law or in the education system at that time?
Oh, do military drafts count as employment? That's a good question. That could definitely raise employment levels for 18 and 19-year-olds who are being drafted into Vietnam here in the late 60s and early 70s.
What is the age range?
Age range 16 to 19 years old.
Okay, cool.
Wondering about off the book employment. That's a good one.
Factoring in population.
Just have to laugh at Hannah's comment about the serotonin rush when we read your comment aloud. That's really cool.
Okay, Gary being Gary.
What are the demographics of these teens? Yeah, that's a fascinating question. This just lumps everyone together. If you could segment this by demographics, you'd have a much more interesting picture of what's going on. Who is actually working here? What kinds of teens are working?
What does labor force mean? Does that account for all jobs? It's a really good point of the fact that not all labor is like accounted for in our economy. So thank you, Katie, for bringing that up.
Yeah, man, you all continue to astound me with the quality of the questions that you're asking here. Yeah, who does teen employment benefit in the end, right? Is it the teen themselves? Is it the corporation, the company that's maybe taking advantage of something there? Is it the family maybe that the teen is working to help support? Ooh, does the birth rate affect this? That's a great one. You'd have to go back 18, between 16 and 19 years to look at the birth rate to see if there was a decrease in it. Internships and volunteer positions, those are not included in this. This is only paid positions. Great. Okay, so let's ask the second question now.
All right, so moving on to our second question, what do you think may explain this decline? So based on the data and some of the amazing things that you guys brought up to consider, what might be causing the decline that we're seeing, especially in like the last 20 years? Competitive college admissions. That's a really interesting point. Academic stress, less jobs available.
Less teens, economic growth in families, no time for jobs.
Child labor laws. Definitely changed the scope of things. More jobs requiring degrees.
Employers see adults as easier to employ.
There are more requirements to get these jobs.
Increased school workload, lack of motivation, lack of necessity due to growing middle class.
More scholarships and money opportunities for high school and college students. So you don't necessarily need a job if the money you're going to use it for can be gotten through scholarships. That's a good point.
Gary with minimum wage increase. That might explain recent events, but I think the minimum wage was pretty stagnant from 2000 to 2010. Maybe it moved up slightly. Ooh, technology cover. Sorry if I didn't hear you if you said this, but technology, that's a fascinating one. So much more automation in, say, like grocery stores, CVS's, fast food. Like those were areas that, it was like a rite of passage for a teenager to work at McDonald's or the grocery store or something like that. But now a lot of those are automated.
Very true. Employers not wanting to train their employees. This kind of falls in line with like labor laws, but I know that there are a lot more requirements to fulfill when training an employee than there were in the past. So investing that time into someone who might not be there a long time is something to consider.
Yeah, I'll throw something out here that might make me unpopular as a millennial with Gen Zers. But does anyone think there's anything just different about the generations that explains this, or is that crazy?
It's like a cultural influence.
Yeah, I mean, or is Gen Z just more skeptical of employment of companies that are looking to employ teens?
And on the same thread of thought, there's also the idea of generational privilege in some cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, millennials were called entitled too when we were teenagers and in our 20s.
And just like speaking to preferences of Gen Z, someone mentioned a more interest in like entrepreneurship.
Oh, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for indulging us on this. This is a really, really fun exercise. And I hope you can continue. Like this is stuff that no one knows the answers to, right? This data comes out from the Bureau of Labor and Statistics, and really, really smart people in this country are trying to figure it out and write pieces on it. And they can't, right? And this is something that like you should not feel like is beyond what you can research and what you can posit as reasons for this happening. And so like bring this to your teachers, bring this to your parents, bring this to people that you want to talk to, and let's try to figure this out. Some people think that this is correlated with crime rates in some cities. When teen employment goes down, particularly in the summer, you might see an increase in crime. And there's a whole host of reasons why that might be the case, but it's really important, and it's not just an academic exercise by any means. Okay, so looking at this data was helpful to show patterns and trends of the past, but it's not enough to tell the whole story. And that goes for the data about my school enrollment as well. To get that whole story, we have to look even further down the iceberg. We have to look at those other two levels, the structure of the system and mental models, to really identify the root causes and figure out what's going on. And so that's what we're going to discuss in next week's Bonfire.
Right. So just to overview some final takeaways, using a tool called the iceberg can help us identify what's happening beyond what we see in the headlines and on social media. And two, the first layer under the tip of the iceberg is patterns of behavior. We can best view these patterns by examining behavior over time graphs.
All right. So the quest this week is a Miracle Moments quest to help you catalog the moments that have shaped you into the person you are today. As an optional exercise, there's no formal quest for this, but if anyone's interested, you can try to create your own behavior over time graph for an event or issue that you want to know more about, especially that you mentioned tonight. And as you're doing that, remember you're trying to answer the following questions. What's been happening? Have we been here somewhere similar before? And if you want any help on that, or are percolating any ideas, just message me and I can help out if you're trying to create a behavior over time graph. Announcements, lots of really great announcements. I am doing a Nick's New Knowledge tomorrow, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We're going to talk about HR1, House Resolution 1, and what its potential impact could be for American democracy. That is something that definitely fits into the iceberg. It is an event that's at the top, and there's a lot of things going on underneath that bill. And so we'll talk about the chances that it has to become a law, who it's going to benefit, the arguments for and against HR1. So join me tomorrow if you'd like to get into the nitty gritty of our legislative process. Second, we are starting a new series called Democracy Discourses. Madison has done a great job of getting this off the ground. These are healthy, productive debates on topics related to building the future of democracy. It's definitely not a place where we yell at each other or threaten each other or harass each other. It's a healthy debate. And if you'd like to participate in one of these are smaller sessions. They're not open invites like Nick's New Knowledge. You can just join the Democracy Discourse channel on Slack if you want to join those. Third, Madison's going to be hosting an unmaster class this week titled How to Save the World by Eating Food. I am really interested in that because I like eating food. It is Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And then finally, we have a Saturday hangout this week, which is going to be bingo at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So please attend.
And this week's content recommendation is a series on HBO Max called Chernobyl. I actually had to watch this for a course in my first semester, and it's actually a really great example of just how looking at the tip of the iceberg of an event that was poorly handled and just diving into what kind of led up to that as well. So great series, definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I've heard wonderful things about it. I'm definitely going to check it out. Thank you for that recommendation. And with that, we are going to do Q&A. Remember, Breakout Hangout has been canceled by Darielle. I think I saw in the chat that someone else might be running it tonight. So if someone else is, thank you so much for doing that. Let's do some Q&A.
So starting off with Freya, is it possible to actually change mental models of things like discrimination? And so, I mean, my initial answer is that we will definitely be diving into that specifically in a future bonfire, but I will also pass it on to Nick.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible to change mental models of things like discrimination. There are plenty of examples of the most extreme, hateful, prejudicial people that have changed their mind. Right? There are neo-Nazis that have reformed and broken out of that hateful cycle. So yes, I think it is possible to change mental models.
All right, we have a question from Lucy. You know what? Me and Lucy have a mutual question here. Nick, tell us about the window. Is it real? Is it a painting? We're all dying to know.
Maybe I'll wait till the last bonfire to reveal that. No, it's not real. It's just a picture.
I've genuinely been curious, and I guess it's been like a year plus. All right. Anna asked the question, what's the difference, if any, between a mental model and implicit bias? I think that a mental model is a little bit more intentional, like you genuinely have the belief of like, this is how things operate. And an implicit bias is something that happens a little bit more unintentionally. You may not be aware that this is an ideology that's informing your thinking and the way that you operate. That's the distinction that I draw between the two.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to describe it. A mental model can lead to implicit biases, but it doesn't necessarily need to. right? I could just have a mental model that that sunny days are the best days. Like that's my mental model, and that might not necessarily lead to like any damaging implicit biases, but it could if my mental model was of something that was much more nefarious. It definitely could lead to implicit biases.
All right. Doesn't seem like we have any more questions for the evening.
We'll give them 30 more seconds to see if anybody else has any questions, and then we'll.
Sounds good.
I see Dariel is defending himself in the chat. Don't worry, Dariel, we have your back still.
I will never ever look at a banana the same after being a part of CU. Jacob asked a question in the chat about being able to see the full iceberg. You can definitely see the full iceberg. It just takes a bit of time and intentionality.
Yeah, and if you're talking about the diagram, I'll send the slides out that have the diagram in there.
Brendan asked the question, do all parts of the iceberg have to be used together when forming thoughts and takeaways, in your opinion? I think that it would be wise to reference all the information that you gain from going throughout the iceberg. Partial, like going halfway through, I feel like that's almost like partial learning. And genuine understanding goes from like undergoing like the entire iceberg and using the entire process. But that's my personal approach. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I think to develop a comprehensive understanding, you're going to want to look at each layer, definitely. But I think each layer taken individually can yield kind of different insights. And so today, if you're looking at a behavior over time graph, that's going to tell you something different than when you go to the next level and you kind of look at the structure of the system. You start like diagramming how the different parts of a system interact. That's going to tell you something much different. So you don't necessarily have to use them together, but if you do, if you start looking at all these different pieces together, you're going to develop a much more comprehensive and deeper understanding of whatever event you're curious about. All right. I guess that's it for questions. Thank you, everybody, for your participation tonight. We really, really valued it. We will be back next Monday for our second to last bonfire, where we're going to be looking at the next layers of the iceberg. And thank you, of course, to Chabu for joining us. Really appreciate you co-hosting tonight, Chabu.
Awesome. I'm so happy to be here. Loved all your Slack responses and hope you guys have a great rest of the day.
Okay, we'll see y'all soon. Bye.